So here I am presenting the API security aspect of in banking and fintech, because you all know category it's a payment gateway aggregator. We work in payment industry. So while working here, I learned something about difference between API security and how we can incorporate that API security into the payment gateways or banking and fintech, or BFSI is the other term what we use. So yeah, I will covering about the why I say unlocking API security. So I think most of you are already from the security background and working in the security companies and all. So everyone knows about API security and all. So why I am specifically targeting this industry, because past recent data says that we have seen so many attacks happening within this industry. So that's why I'm covering this specific topic. So before starting, just little introduction about me. So apart from my name, just wanted to highlight some of the things, some of my experience as well. So yeah, this is me. I have around 9.5 years experience in application and product security specifically. And I have worked around enhanced several leading companies, Cigital, Synopsys. I started my career with Cigital, then I worked with Synopsys, Rakuten, Swiggy, Amazon, and currently as working with Cashfree. I have special expertise in API security, secure design, code reviews, security automations, DevSecOps, as well as cloud security. And recently, I think previous year, I discovered a CV in a well-known basically automation tool, D-Tool, and I reported them and I got the CV ID for that. And then I recently, last year also, I presented in the Global Security Conference in API on Money. And I also like to do part-time speaking, mentoring around. So yeah, this is all about me. Let's go next. So I discuss the agenda first. So the whole structure of this presentation will be mostly into covering the each and every aspect what we want to have, like first understanding of the space. Then we will try to understand what is the security need in specific this space, banking and fintech. Then we will talk about the challenges, attacks, and case studies. Some of the case study specific to again BFSI industry. And then we will go on to the best practices applying the security, how we can implement security. Some of the implementation will overlap in the regular API security as well, but yeah, it's just wanted to covering the highlight of the BFSI industry. So let's start with the first phase, understanding the space in the API way. Before moving further, before even that, what is API in fact? How many you what is actually API is? Yeah, let's have this session in a more communication way and let's start engaging. Like, anyone explain what is actually API is? Interface for?
Communication between
services.
Yeah. And what API stands for?
Application programming interface.
Correct. So it's basically is providing interface, and there is a very old analogy behind that. That let's say you are going in a restaurant, you order a food, so the waiter who is taking your order is the API. That's the very old analogy we will use for explaining the API. But then what is the API in fintech? So if you see this, why we are talking, so as we are already aware that API is something that which do operations for us, which is basically enabling us to provide the service what we are looking for. Similar way in fintech, basically how we use API is, when the fintech, let's say, because why I am using API in the fintech? Because I am not a bank, but I want that bank services. Okay, so how I can do that? Basically what I will do a fintech pays to the fees to access BaaS platform, which is bank as a service basically. Okay, I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Then this financial institution acting as a BaaS provider opens APIs. Now this bank will give their APIs to this financial institute or fintech companies to use a specific service. For example, I want to see a person account credit score. Then it will say, okay, you can take this API and it will give you the fastest score of that credit score. So that's how they will do it. And then third part is fintech uses this APIs to build a new financial services. That's how, if you already aware, why we are talking, because every day we are using those APIs. Why knowingly or unknowingly, we are using it. So if, for example, you open your CRED, how you are aware about CRED, okay, or any kind of banking app, cash pay also. So whenever you do a payment, okay, when you are checkout page, you do a payment. That payment basically goes through a API that process your request, and it will connect with the bank API and do the operation, and then that's how the transaction happens. Okay, so that's the API in FinTech, that how this whole flow works. Because as a FinTech provider, we have to reach out to the bank, and then bank opens some APIs for us based on registration guidelines, and then we'll use a FinTech company use those APIs. So this is just some of the data on what is actually API. So as we mentioned, that API is application programming interface, the core of digital transformation in the financial sector. Seamless communication, APIs enable companies to innovate quickly. Because of the API, we are able to innovate more now. Because we know how there is no need to build a new API. If there is an API already is there in the market, people use those APIs instead of building a new one. So this has led to the rise of concepts like open banking and banking as service. So I will cover this more in the next topic. So it's just a code that API enable banks and fintechs to deliver faster, more efficient, and more personalized services by allowing data to flow between systems securely. So if you see this is like just representation of how API works. Let's say this is the bank, there's a bank too, and CashFree is basically a service provider who wants to provide service to the customer, but they also want to access the customer information from the bank. So how they will do this the whole flow. So I request the bank 1 to give me particular information about the user, or bank 2, and this is how the whole flow works. So API bank is online connection, which is a third party can establish, third parties can use the API to pull data, offer bank like bank balance check, account creation, you name it. It's all whatever we are doing in the bank as any kind of FinTech application. It's all through going via the APIs. So there are different models of the API banking. First is the open banking, then banking as a service, platform banking, embedded payments, DeFi APIs, and data as a service. So if I just give a small introduction, then open banking is nothing that basically bank open some API for using. It's a public API. They will say, okay, you can use this API, and for accessing a certain amount of data of a customer. For example, name, account balance, all those things. Okay. For example, you use any kind of wallet. That wallet basically fetches your balance from the bank API and shows it to you. Then there is a banking as a service, which basically we are doing that. I want to create a service for my customer, but for that I need some kind of information from the bank. So that's why I will build as a service. So neo banking, if you know, there are banks who, without having the banking environment, they are basically do the credit, they give you the loans and everything. So that is called a bank as a service. Platform banking is a reverse way of that, where bank actually uses the FinTech APIs to provide their customer kind of service. Okay, so let's say I am a bank, I want some specific service for my customer, so I will reach out to some FinTech, I will use their APIs. Got it? Now there is embedded payments. DeFi API is nothing, it is a decentralized finance APIs. It's using cryptocurrency and everything. And data as a service, again same thing, where I want a credit score of some customer. So I will use those APIs. Any questions so far? No. Am I going too fast? Yeah, so again there is a categorization of API in BFSI industry or in a normal industry as well. So there are three types of API. One is private APIs, one is partner APIs, and the third one is open API. Anyone know what is this? Any difference between them? What is a private API? Can speak. No one is judging here. You want to speak? What is private API?
Private type API is used
Yeah,
for certain organizations, which is actually not available for public.
Correct. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Partner API is like Razor Pay and Taxi Payments Pay, including businesses.
Yeah. And then open API?
Open APIs are used for
Public API. So yeah, your name?
Pawan.
Pawan. Yeah, as Pawan says, it's correct only that private APIs is basically used within the enterprise. So, or the second name of this will be internal API, which we all know, right? Whenever there is a service to service call happening, internal calls are happening, which is not available to public, it's a private API. So used within enterprise, improve efficiency and security, and not exposed to external parties. Where the partner APIs have agreements with partners. So specific, these are not public APIs. There is a specific agreement happen between two partners, and they will say we will use your API, you can use our API. This is a third-party kind of API integration, you can say. Then why we use this exchange of financial information, drives integration and monetization. Then there's an open API, which we all know. It's a public API. Whenever some FinTech or any company wants to use a bank APIs, they will use those kind of APIs. So there are some of the data. So I want to cover how the industry grows from last 10 decades, okay, or last for 2021 if you see, there was 795 million API calls using banking API, which has increased to now it's 1.58 billion in 2024 data. So this is how the API power is. Everyone is using how much. If you see the number of calls, you can assume that why we are covering. Maybe because I'm sure that most of you are thinking like we come for API security, why we are collecting this data. This data is necessary to understand the attack surface of the, okay, where the actual attackers are targeting it. Why the attackers are targeting it. That's the whole view to give this idea about what is the whole industry is. Then there is predicts that number of API, open API banking API was been increased to 102 billion in 2023 to 580 billion. And later I will show you the exact data also. So companies that have adopted APIs have seen their market capitalization increase by more than 12% compared to those they have not. Because of the service, simple. Because if I am not able to grow my services, then I cannot attack customers also. The total revenue of worldwide FinTech application market is expected to reach $566 billion, which is a huge amount. So if you see, there is a site called Open Banking API, which anyone can go and see how many API calls are happening on a year by year. So if you see this is I think 2024, and if you see the last data, this is 2023, then 2024 and 2025. If you see this, 17 million requests and 6 million requests per day. API calls, open API calls. So this is the attack surface for an attacker, because if world is using it, then there is something for a fruitful information for an attacker. This is related to India only. If you see this, India is among the fastest growing FinTech markets in the world. India FinTech industry market size is 584 billion, and now it's estimated to 1.5 trillion by 2025. And if you see this data, 185 billion number of retail transactions in just 2024, then 1.13 lakh crore value of digital payment transaction done by UPI only. So this is just to give you a insight of what is actually happening within the FinTech market. So this was all about the understanding the attack surface. Because why we discuss that? Because as an attacker or as a security tester also, always we first look into what is the fruitful information, why I am doing that much work for understanding. So for that I need to understand the attack surface of that. So that's the reason why attackers are targeting banking API specifically. So now we discuss about why we need security here. So if you see here, why API security is crucial in BFSI. Anyone know BFSI, right? Oh, sorry. So it's a banking, financial services and insurance. Now if you see here, crucial part of every BFSI industry will be a merchant, a customer and bank. These are the three main entities, majorly, but not related to that. But major parties always involve merchant, one customer or bank. So these have interrelation between them via API calls. Now, why security is needed here? Because it's a first and foremost point is it's a highly regulated environment. One mistake can cost us a huge money. Our license can cancel. So many cases you have heard about Paytm and all. Okay, this is the reason. Because it's not about what vulnerable application you have, what vulnerable APIs you have. It's about how you are following the guidelines or not. Because this deals with the data of a customer. It deals with the private data of a customer. Okay. Then this involves direct handling of money and sensitive data, which I mentioned. Then there is a trust and brand reputation. Once everyone knows about your brand, then you cannot do that specific mistake where you have to pay a price for from the regulatory environment, or you have to price from your customer. So that's why your brand reputation is important. Then higher attack sensitivity, because financial fraud, data theft, once you able to identify a flaw in API which is related to banking and all, the attack surface, as I mentioned, can be increased, and then you can find out more kind of attacks where you can deal with the money, you can do a fraud, you can do a data theft, all those things, okay? Then, because we don't rely on only what our APIs are, okay, because this need of businesses, we have to integrate with third-party integrations. So I can confirm my security, but how I can confirm the other party security, okay, but I have to use that also. So that is the reason we have to understand the security aspect of that. So as there's one quote, securing API isn't just a technical requirement, it's about maintaining customer trust, avoiding regulatory penalties, and ensuring long-term business success. So far, any questions? So yeah, information flowing through APIs. So if you see this diagram, anyone can tell me what are the crucial information will present in an API call which is happening in the whole flow. If you want to understand the flow, then there is a customer who places an order, which is a merchant website, anyone can be the merchant, then send request to the payment gateway request to the acquiring bank, authorization request, and then issuing bank confirms that, and that's the whole transaction happen. What are the crucial information within this flow?
So for the customer, it's name, his name, email ID, his transaction details like account number, credit card information, so all this will be there.
Yeah, correct. What else? Yeah, please speak.
Sir, excuse me.
You want to speak? Okay. Yeah, as she said, that transaction data, payment method information, user information, lots of PIA, which is a major concern. Authorization data, because tokens, everything is going in the API calls. Status and response codes, because this helps us to understand the attacker how this API is working. So if you see this data, 50,564 is the average number of APIs an organization has in place today, and 25,592 APIs large enterprise have average. So this much APIs within the operation people use, as per the data. So this is basically survey from the Traceable API Security Report. It says that their survey reveals that APIs financial organization commonly handle highly sensitive information. 60% is PI data handling. Then they have 60% of authentication data. Then they have payment card details of 56%, and then 55% of device and location data. So this much data is flowing within that API cycle. That's given attacker to hack on those APIs or do something malicious to those APIs, because when he is able to do that, this much data he can gain. So yeah, this is again one more data that 41% of organizations were hit by API security incident in the past 12 months itself. And then 63% of those incidents involved a data breach or data, because the eventual goal is always a data breach for attackers, okay? And if you see this API security risk, by the percentage, data breach is the 55%, accident exposure of data, which is unnecessary providing information in the API response and all, which is 46%, APIs to be depreciated, shadow APIs, DDoS, unknown shadow APIs, account takeovers. So this is the data. And this is one more that if you see most attacked industry, you see 36.8% is the financial services. That's the reason we are having this topic. We are covering this topic here, because the most vulnerable industry is financial services. Almost half of ATO is account takeover attacks. Target API directly. Account takeover attacks targeting APIs account for 41% of all ATO attacks recorded by Imperva. Basically Imperva also released some bad bot report, and they identify that 44% of the basically API accounted for account takeover attack. So this was about that. I think all of you understand why we need security in API. Any questions in that? So yeah, so I am going by the storyline because I wanted to show you what is the surface here, then why we need security, and then we will cover what are the challenges, because everyone wants to implement security, but there are some challenges where we say that we are not 100% secure. There is a reason for that. So if you see this, the key challenges, there is a survey happened and that they asked that in that what is your biggest API security challenge. If you see that 57% people responded API security skills. It's not just the security engineer skills, it's about developer skills as well. Then pre-production API testing, 55% the reason for that. API runtime protection, API visibility. So what you understand by this data?
API is more vulnerable.
API is vulnerable, but what this data is basically saying, what is the challenge why people are not able to secure APIs?
Developer education around security.
Correct. Because developers are not aware about the methodology can be used for secure APIs, how they can do a secure coding while developing APIs. All those challenges are there in every organization. That's why the percentage is more there. Then pre-production API testing. Most of the companies, organizations don't do that pre-production API testing. They do QA testing, but nobody regularly follows the security pen testing of API. API runtime protection, a lack of tools, lack of inventory. Then API visibility, which is again same thing, inventory, because most of the companies don't handle that API properly because there were so many shadow API sprawl happen. Then there is a similar survey disclosed that what type of API testing are we doing, basically those companies are doing. So this survey is from the companies only. So if you see that in security testing, only 4% people are actually doing the security testing of APIs. Maximum is functional testing, which again, so QA testing everyone does. Then if you see this one, the question was that, do you have inventory of your APIs? And if you see that 16% people out of that say you don't have, some 22% says we have, most of the say 30%, most means we say that okay we have but we don't know. Then 25% will have we all know our APIs, what our APIs are roaming around here. So if I talk about the theoretical term of that, every key challenge, first one definitely comes under shadow APIs. Developers create APIs, then they create a new version of that API, and then that they forgot what was the old API, which is a shadow API. And that API version was vulnerable to some attack, but we created a new one, but we didn't fix the old one. And that old one is still available for public. Inventory management is the second biggest issue because the number of APIs is increasing and nobody is taking care of the inventory, because when we develop API for a small task, we forgot to document those APIs, specification wise and all. So that's the problem in inventory. When the security breach happened, that time only people got to know, okay, this much APIs we have. Legacy APIs, again, old APIs are there, inconsistent authentication. So this is basically, let's say I develop an authentication mechanism in my API. I say, okay, this is protected by OAuth or JWT. But then what I will say, I will use one more API, which is I'm using basic auth. So for both the APIs, there are two types of authentication I'm using. So I will say, okay, this is internal only, so it will fine for not use an authentication. So that's the reason of people. Authorization gaps, again, people forgot to implement proper authorization checks in APIs. They say, okay, token is there, then everyone can use it, okay, because anyway authentication is happening. So then people forgot to do authorization. On a front-end layer, everyone do authorization, but by the API, very less people do this. No API security in SDLC, which is a major concern, which I mentioned that developers and the SDLC cycle, in the whole development cycle, nobody planned for API security. They started with the planning phase. If they include this API security term within the planning phase, then we can reduce that attack surface. Rate limiting, improper logging monitoring. Rate limiting, everyone knows that it's a kind of, I develop an API, but I forgot to implement a rate limiting on that API. So that resource consumption can be increased by an attacker. So that's how they can do it. Then improper login and monitoring. Again, same thing, that my API got hacked. Why I got hacked? When I post analysis, I was not able to have because I don't have proper login and monitoring. Versioning lifecycle management, third-party APIs. So this third-party APIs. So I can secure my APIs, then, but how I can secure the other party APIs? Because we don't do the third-party risk management properly. We don't ask the question that why have you done any kind of pen testing before? Show me your pen test reports before integrating. We don't do this third-party risk management. And this is, we all know. I think most of us know. The OWASP Top 10 2023. So it was released in 2019 and now 2023. So if you see the whole change happen here, excessive data exposure and mass assignment, it's combined into the one category which is broken object property level authorization. How many are aware about this? OWASP Top 10. Okay, one. How many are aware about OWASP? What is OWASP? Yeah, can you tell what is OWASP?
Power is a publisher for cybersecurity, international publisher, and yeah.
Okay, anyone else want to try?
Well, basically it's an organization which every time releases new top 10 vulnerabilities or the problems which is faced by the developers.
Correct. So this OWASP is an organization, it's a community, same thing. So that community basically highlights the key challenges or key security issues in the current aspect. Initially it was web application, then Kubernetes, then API security, then LLM security. Everything they release a OWASP top 10 kind of thing where they find out that what are the major challenges or major security issues identified within that particular technology. So if you see this, this recent list, they have merged two top 10 vulnerabilities into one, and there is a reason because there is a sudden increase happen within this broken authorization level. So I will talk about what is different categories of broken authorization. But yeah, then they introduce a new one which is unrestricted access to sensitive business flows, then SSRF, and then unsafe consumption of APIs. So this was the overall API security of not related to BFSI, not only related to BFSI, but related to all the companies, all the organizations. What are the API security risks, which is OWASP top 10 BFC. Now if you see related to the common attacks on BFSI APIs, if you see this rate limiting is the top one, because that's the crucial part where sometimes people forgot to do that, or they do it but they are not doing it properly. So this was the main target of rate limiting is the number one, even though in OWASP it is the fourth number, but in a BFSI it's a major category because people start doing the DDoS attack, people start doing that resource consumption attack on your APIs, so that they can leverage that particular attack to do further, or maybe the ransomware or something like that. Okay. Then broken authorization is again the second number, which is the most common attack. In the OWASP top 10, it's the number one. In BFSI also it's a number one. Broken authentication, access data exposure. Then if you see this four category, these are the major chunk where coming from, especially your BFSI industry, because we have certain tools, we have certain methodology, we have frameworks to do the security and all, but these basic checks, people forget to do that. Same thing, authentication, authorization attacks, API abuse and business logic exploits, data exposure, injection attacks, insecure API endpoints, payment and financial frauds, supply chain dependency attacks, cryptographic token-based attacks, mobile and web API exploitation. Yeah, any questions here?
So rate limiting, like what are defenses that do you implement? Like,
so for rate limiting, yeah, there is a two type of rate limiting can happen. One is the application level rate limiting, and then API gateway or WAF. So these kind of security implementation people do in rate limiting. So basically what rate limiting means is there is a certain limit for an API call, correct? That API call should not pass that certain limit. If they are passing that, there should be a business justification or some use case for that. So that rate limit, how we can achieve? The lower level we can achieve from the SDLC lifecycle, we can do application level rate limiting. If you want to do a parameter security, then we can do a WAF or API gateway rate limiting.
But both of them will be based on like either IP address or like the user ID. So suppose there is a way in which they can automate the creation of user account as well, like how would you further implement that?
Yeah, so in rate limiting, as you mentioned that fixing can be a IP based rate limiting, or the API level rate limiting also is there, attribute level rate limiting is also there, path based. So there is not only that IP level we can do. Okay, there are attribute level also, a specific path I can do a functional level rate limiting as well. So there are certain things, yeah, in WAF layer sometimes it's difficult to do it, but that's why I mentioned application level people can do. Yeah, so let's start with the majority 4 category what we see in the BFSI industry. First one is always stop on broken authorization. In broken authorization, there are 3 types which is defined in OWASP top 10 as well. And I want to cover because there is a huge difference and there is a confusion. People always try to identify that the major category is always a broken authorization. But if you see that there are functional level authorization, then there is an object level authorization, and there is object property level authorization. Anyone know the difference between all these 3? Try. Broken authorization you understand, right? Or should I explain that also? I'll explain? Okay. So so broken authorization. What is authorization and authentication? That anyone know? Can you explain that? Difference between authentication and authorization.
Authentication is before logging, when we put our credentials, we are just authenticating to that website.
Correct.
And authorization is what all things we can access from that website. So it's authorization.
True. So if you take a simple case here, today all you come here, right? But you are not from Kashmir. How you are able to sit here? Who authorized you to come here? You showed something, ID or something like that. That is your authentication or authorization. Based on that authentication, you got the authorization. Okay, so this is the core difference. Yeah, so authorization always consists of 3 categories, but yeah, just to give you example, there's something you are, something you know, and something you have. It's a common terminology in authorization. Something you are, which is basically you present yourself, and something you know, it's a password. Sorry, authentication consists of these 3 categories. Then something you know is you know your password or something like that, and something you have is you have a digital biometric or something. This is the 3 category in authorization. Authorization gives you eligibility to perform some action. Okay, and within the authorization, there are different level of that. One is the functional level, one is the object level, and one is the object property level. So before going there, just see these 2 examples. These are 2 different. Okay, and just read this. Are you able to read? It's visible, right? Read this one and try to understand what kind of authorization it is. It's an object level, it's an object property level, or it's a functional level. So what is happening here? There is a request, genuine request, going API user financial info. It will log into the system, and then this API get data of user 2. Now this thinking, what if I manipulate the parameter instead of user 1, I will put user 2, and if C, I can get the information. If I get that, I will try to automate the whole thing, and I can fetch all the user IDs and user information. It's authorization breach, correct? Because I am only authorized to see my information. Why I am able to see other user information? This is an authorization. I am not authorized to do that. But if I am able to do that, that's a broken authorization. Now, which type of broken authorization it is? It's object level? Object level. Okay. Why you say that?
Because each user is kind of an object.
Correct. So every entity, this user 1, user 2, automate ID 3, 4, 5, it's representing an object. And this object says that particular user is only can access a particular object information. But what if I am able to access another object information? That's a broken object level authorization issue. Now second one is, if you see this, now similar case, but what here this attacker is able to do, there is an API call is going, API v2 user body, and there is an ID going, then server will respond with some kind of information, internal ID, email, phone. Now there is an attacker who try to change this instead of get, it will change to put. And then it will try to put one more information. If you see response are 3, but now it will put user.admin, user.role, and then it will send, and then server will accept it. So which type of authorization issue? This is also authorization issue, correct?
Yeah.
But which type?
Property.
Object property. This was an object, which is a user. User's property is object property. Now I am able to add additional fields in the object property. That's why it's called a broken object property level authorization issue. Clear, understood, right? Short term of its broken object level authorization is BOLA. Short term of broken object level property authorization is OPA. And there is one more. So if you understand BOLA, and there is one more. So yeah, just to give that again same thing, and I explained it. Broken object level authorization, it's an authorization flaw, object-based request, access, update, deleting data of another user. How to test? If you want to test it, basically a very simple test case will be identify the object, use the API, recon the object, replace the user object value with another user object. How to prevent? Proper authorization mechanism, use of random and uncreated values of GUIDs for. So in the previous example, if you say user 1, user 2, it's a predictable. So if I use a random UID or GUID framework, that other attacker will not be able to identify that. Now next comes the broken authentication. Yeah, before that, sorry, I just. So yeah, after that there is one more function level authorization issue, which is basically nothing is similar where I can able to do such functions which is I am not authorized to do. It's a different thing. Okay, here you are a user, but you just adding the different fields in the user property. In a function level authorization issue, you don't have access at all. For example, you are able to access an admin level functionality. That is a function level authorization issue. Correct? Now, if anyone asks you somewhere what is difference between these three, anyone can explain? Sure. Should I ask now? Sure or not? Okay. Next from authentication issue, which I mentioned authentication something 3 level, something you are, something you have. Okay. Here its flaw is basically lies in the authentication itself, not the authorization. I am not even log into the system now. Okay. I am trying to log in, but there is an authentication flow. Brute force, guessing reset password, insecure implementation of auth tokens. Okay, these are the common flaws which we see. Microservice to microservice without authentication. It's a SQS call, no authentication happening. Unauthenticated service can call another service, and that's how API breach can also happen. How to test it? It's a simple trial and error method, because if you see brute force, guessing, reset password, you have to try it. You have to try all those methods to bypass the authentication. Scanners can help, or either you can break the logic. So there was a case long back in my previous company where I was able to do account takeover using a sign-up flow, which is very rare to do it, but sign-up flow also can have a account takeover. I was able to log into different account using a sign-up flow. So yeah, how to prevent that? Understand the possible flows. So that's why it's not about scanners will report or I will run the SQL map or something like that will give me the finding. You have to understand the whole logic of authentication, what is happening in the system. Then you will be able to identify the gap. Understand authentication mechanism. OAuth is not authentication, neither are the API keys. How many you aware about this OAuth is not an authentication mechanism? Or how many you aware about OAuth? It's a protocol to authorize a particular resource, to giving the authorization of accessing a particular resource. I will not go deep into this because otherwise I think. Okay, then MFA or sensitive. So why we specifically mention this? OAuth is not an authentication; it's a protocol for authorization. Authentication, OpenID Connect is the authentication top of working of the OAuth, where we do authentication. Then someone will assign that particular server will assign a JW token, and then whole structure happen. MFA for sensitive operation, always implement 2FAs so that someone cannot bypass that authentication, or at least it will increase the authentication. Rate limiting CAPTCHA API keys should not be used for user authentication, they should only be used for API client authentications. Okay. Yeah. So, which I think this we already covered. Now you are understanding what I quoted at property level. Here we are trying to do so as I mentioned in the previous diagram, you see this excessive data exposure and mass assignment is combined to this now, and which is including exposing sensitive properties, CRUD operations, how to test, observe the response, play with the parameters, request simple test case only. Okay, you just need to understand the flow of that okay, I am trying to add user functionality. Can I add one more parameter which say role equal to admin, and if the server accepts, then I get admin access directly. Validation expose object properties, avoid using generic methods such as toJSON. These are the generic methods every time people use in property level authorization. Yeah, so one more common vulnerability in BFSI is the unrestricted resource consumption, which is a DDoS or rate limiting. Okay, exhausting the quota, availability impact, cost consumption, because this is the huge impact on cost side. Because if you see infra works on that. If you exhaust the quota of that API, then other services got impacted because of that. So that's the major kind of category. That's why if you see in the BFSI diagram, previously it was a top category. Uploading a data, let's say there is a file functionality that only expecting, let's say 2 MB file, but what if you can upload a 1 GB, that you are exhausting the quota of that. Okay. Let's say there is an API call happening for a chatbot. Okay. Now, if you can continuously pinging that chatbot and then the chatbot stop responding, that is also one more exhaustion limit. How to test consuming the resource bandwidth? It's a simple test case. Try to perform action which is not supposed to in the API. DDoS prevention is validation on resources. Always validate what is particular API is meant to be. If 2 MB is allowed, only 2 MB should be uploaded to the particular service. Maximum size. Proper server-side validation for query string and request body parameters, bill alerts, quota. So there should be always one more parameter. Always you should have, or system should have an alert if the particular quota is about to exhaust. Yeah, this we covered. Why function level? Same thing. Right? When I am trying to access a function which is not meant to for my use case, but I am able to do that for an admin API or some other API, that is the function level authorization issue. Testing methodology is same. To try a CRUD operation which is not you are not supposed to do. STD method manipulation. So, for example, there is a get API. Okay, get API says get user 123. But if you can use delete user 123, that's the functional authorization issue. You deleted that user. How to prevent deny all by default? It's a basic mechanism of that. That you have to say that okay, by default everyone is denied. Now I have to implement one resource access to one person, then I will eventually implement that instead of directly giving permission to everyone. Authorization checks on functional level calls based on the user group role. So always RBAC should be there based on that. And there is one more common attack vector in BFSI, which is a server-side request forgery. It's basically validating an API request for remote resources. For example, there is a file upload functionality or get file functionality. That get file says you can fetch this PDF file. Okay. Now if that PDF file, instead of putting that PDF file, you change that parameter and say I want to access an internal service. So that will happen, and that particular service will give you access to an internal service because the URL validation or the resource validation is not present. Bypassing firewall, VPNs, webhook, file fetching, because most common attack vectors found in SSRF is webhooks, file fetching from URLs, SSOs. And then how to test functionality to links, URL, STS call. In AWS, if you see that is a metadata call, this is a common attack SSRF. In SSRF people do it, accessing the metadata URL. Then how to prevent that? Isolate the resource fetching mechanism in your network whenever possible. We use allow list. If the particular resource says this should only have the PDF file access, then it should only have PDF file access. URL schemes and code. that is particular code and scheme should be defined properly, hard-coded kind of thing, where if I'm putting another URL or something, internal URL, it should not accept it. Media types should be properly defined, disable HTTP redirections, do not send raw response to the clients. Then there is one more which is very common, and I will not call it a vulnerability, but it's a very common problem. Because of this vulnerability can happen. It's a improper inventory management. As I mentioned in like my previous slide also, there is a documentation, lack of documentation people do. So documentation blind spot, no doc, old doc, environment clarity, no inventory. Okay. These are the common problems in every organization regarding APIs people have, that there are so many APIs people build but forget to implement documentation. So one or at least a security engineer can understand that what is this API is doing. Data flow blind spot, sharing data with third party, no inventory, no justification, which we cover, right? Let's say there is a third party integration is happening. Because my business has to do what I do, okay, I will they are asking this data, I will give this data without validating why they need this data, without doing a vendor risk management properly. So that gives us the access to cross-question that vendor, third-party integration, why you need this, why you need this much data, okay. How to test Google Docs, Excel beta, prevent inventory. Say how to inventory, why I mentioned, emphasize on that because this is the most crucial part. We have to collect their inventories. Yeah, so this was all about the attacks, common attacks, prevention of common attacks related to BFSI. Now, I will cover the recent attacks which has happened already in APIs, in FinTechs. So this is just a record, but if you see this, these are the well-known companies, if you already know it. And what was the impact when there is an API breach happen with us? Okay, Trello, Instagram, LinkedIn, okay, impact, account takeover, records breach, data breach, all those things, okay. So again, this is the recent one. India Post Office portal leak exposed thousands of KYC records. It's a API breach, again, related to API security. And if you see this was the basic term. It's a basic attack. There is no specialization needed for this doing. What he did is, there was a get API call, document ID and all. It was a government product. There is a particular KYC document. He just accessed this. There is no authentication. You see, there is no authentication header itself. It's a Indian government post office API. And directly accessing data over a user. But because why they think? Because the front end, the website have authentication mechanism. But the API don't have. Similar kind of issue I found in it's basically a video lecture kind of website, where what I did was, there was a section where I wanted to log in and then I have to pay for that video lectures. But when I check their APIs, similar kind of, I directly hit that API and I get the all lecture links directly. So same thing. Then there is a Apache FunTrack SQL injection vulnerability, again same API vulnerability. Then this is, can you imagine which platform is this one? No, HackerOne is a platform, but where this vulnerability got reported? No, it's a GitLab. So if you see this, again, GitLab, we think like GitLab is a very big platform, all those things, right? But if you see the vulnerability, what he did, it's a reset password functionality. What he did is, in email, when the email goes to victim@gmail.com, he put one more parameter, attacker@gmail.com, and this particular functionality sends reset password on both emails for a basic vulnerability. And now if you see, I'm not able to confirm, the bounty was $35,000 for this kind of vulnerability. This is like a 10th class student can expect this. $35,000 for this, just adding one parameter in the request. So this is the power of API. So every time when we start testing, start accessing this web applications and all, that's why I keep saying that web application era is, I think, gone now. People are focusing on API and people are focused on API attacks versus API security as well. this is the CV which I reported to Retool. And if I talk about this vulnerability was, this is again very basic thing, nothing. So I have got some testing. I want to have access of then one API/resource was the API, and this was a admin API. So what I did, I used my token as a normal user token. I hit that API and I got that a database username, credential, password is coming in the response directly. So this reported to Retool. They fixed it in a new version. So far, yeah, this was the recent. Now we understand what is the best practice, how we can apply the security. I think we covered most of this. I will re-emphasize on those things: authentication, authorization, strong authentication should be implemented. OAuth 2.0, JWT, least privilege access is the basic thing we always should do. Input validation, rate limiting, data encryption. Yeah, this is I think I did not cover, but yeah, always encrypt your data on the client level as well, on the server level as well, attribute level if you can do. So that encryption is the major key of that. So that if even if some attack happen, your data is secure. Nobody will able to read that data. APIs, keys, secrets, continuous monitoring, improvement, regular security audits, logging and monitoring, versioning, lifecycle management, which I already covered, that you should have a proper versioning of your APIs, inventory of your APIs. And this is the crucial part where instead of doing all these things you are doing, but if your training and lack of awareness is there from the developer side, from any one side, then nothing will make a sense of all those, because they will eventually make a vulnerable API and then someone will exploit that. So if we are protecting here itself, then it will be more crucial for an attacker to exploit those vulnerabilities. Some more layer, secure SDLC, DevSecOps flow. So if secure SDLC we talk, it's a DevSecOps, it's a shift left on the system. Like even the planning phase have a security mindset, security engineer creating a attacker story based on the user story. Then gateways always protect you from the happening API gateway breach and all. Service mesh, authentication, zero trust formula, threat modeling, vendor risk management, and yeah, that's it. Yeah, sorry for taking extra. And what else you asked for?
That's clear. And I have one more doubt, like the sign-up vulnerability that you exploited, like you modified the parameter of an existing user with your data, or like the
Yeah, so I'll cover that. What happened was there is a sign-up flow. In sign-up flow, there is a user registration, and if you put your email ID, it will say that this user is already registered. And then I check the response. So check the response was coming us 200 okay, but the error response was JSON body, which is say that user is already registered. And once I fill that first email, then I will redirect to the second form. So what I did, I bypassed the response modification techniques. Instead of 200 error message, I replaced that with the actual when the user is not present. Then what happened that I redirect to the second page directly. And I was thinking, okay, I will be able to register the user. But when I log in, I saw that old user word got replaced by my new account ID. So that's why I have that whole account access of that user.
So there is no DB verification?
No. Any other question?
So we have these REST APIs, SOAP APIs, GraphQL. So any of these are by design secure, or all of them are equally?
Yeah, nothing is by design. Security is a terminology people use, but yeah, for example, REST API. Okay, REST API, you cannot say it's not secure. It can be secure. Yeah, comparatively, if you say REST and SOAP, which is secure, then SOAP is definitely secure. But it cannot, that user is, this usability is not that much, because REST is more ease of data, okay, that stateful nature of that. But SOAP is, especially banking and all, the legacy system still use SOAP, okay. Then GraphQL is the comparatively again more secure, because only one endpoint, then only you have to define the attributes.
And what tools can we use for automated testing?
Yeah, so There are, so again, one more thing I want to cover this. Previously, from your security background, you have seen the DAS solutions and all. People used to have DAS capabilities. But I was personally not very big fan of DAS tooling and all. Because this similar for API security, because they are solution for API security scanning and all. Most of the issues, what this API security tools or the DAS tools will do, they will scan, they have a certain test cases they will run, and they will identify, okay, this is vulnerable. So you can use an API inventory and all, but when in terms of the business logic issues, these tools are not able to do. But yeah, tooling for a basic hygiene check, we can use it. For example, if I want to implement that API security scanner in my CI/CD pipeline, so that at least 10 security checks will already happen. When the application reaches to me as a security engineer, I can only focus on the manual testing or the business logic use case. Because this usually what I personal experience again, this API security related business logic issues, I never found a tool is able to find. Because that requires a whole analysis of that. Might be because of this AI thing. Now it will be easy to find the business logic issues within the tool itself. But so far I have never seen that tool is reporting a business logic issues.
Do you use any AI related tools for application security? Like for API security?
Currently no, but yeah, we are trying to implement the similar kind of within the, so what we are trying to do is, because as I mentioned, every phase there is a QA testing. So why we cannot integrate the QA testing with the security testing, and as I mentioned, do a hygiene check, let's say 10-12 test cases I will write, and leverage the AI for that, or for the, I think there are companies also there who are, what they are doing, they produce a document, or there's a design document, they give it to the AI, and then AI will tell what are the security concerns can happen in that. So similar kind of we are trying here also, but they are currently not implemented. Any questions?